Hello, hello. Welcome to Makeup by the Numbers once again. So today I'm going to do a bit heavier of a talk. I tend to alternate just depending on like where my mind's at. And I feel like today I've been chewing on like a lot of stuff because I've spent way too much time on social media this morning, per my usual. And I kind of want to talk about like extinction theory and moral panic theory, because I feel like right now we're using terms that don't quite make sense. So, for background, my school of study actually started in international affairs before I switched to mental health. And I do a lot of behavioral work because I work with people who have autism. That is part of my career path. So it's kind of strange sometimes when I hear terms being misused and I'm like, I kind of start to gaslight myself and I go, well, wait, I know what this term means. Why am I hearing it used in this context? And the first time, it was a couple months ago, someone was talking about like some of the, this is like pre-ice or like beginning of ice. People were talking about like, oh, this is an extinction burst. This is the left winning. The right wing's throwing a temper tantrum. And I was like, that's not what a distinction burst is. But I was seeing the response video to that and I was like, okay, yeah, no one's actually saying this. This was just like a creator found like a one-off comment and was like, hey, let's snip this in the bud. But then the other day I saw it, and I saw it in some comments as well. So like I've seen it now in the last few weeks, in response to some of the political unrest going on here in the US, where I've seen the term extinction burst used multiple times. And like, just for clarification, you cannot rightfully or accurately use the term extinction burst to describe the current political chaos. For those of you who don't know, an extinction burst is when a behavior increases when the reward for that behavior has been withdrawn. So an example of that would obviously be like a child throws a really, really big temper tantrum when you start rewarding that. Or a gambler starts increasing his bet when the hand turns against him. There's a very clearly defined antecedent, and there's a very clearly defined reward for that behavior. And so when people use it to talk about like societal chaos and activism and related things in the political sphere, what you're actually describing is, a loss of dominance and a power struggle. And although I won't say that power is not an aspect of almost every relationship, including, toddlers, gamblers, and politicians, it's focused on a different area of subject. One is the behavioral sciences. They're both behavioral sciences even, but different groups of people acting for different reasons in different contexts. Like, it's just not an adequate parallelism, and I think it kind of glosses over a lot of the potential action that we could be taking if you were so inclined to be an activist in this scenario. The concern here is not with behaviors about getting what we want and temper tantrums. It's much bigger than that. It's about power and privilege. And again, they're related, but they are not the same. So like, I want to stress that there's no clear behavior. There's groups of factions here, and there's no clear reward, other than perhaps more power. What we're actually looking at in like the global, I guess, scale of things or perspective taking, is inconsistency. And in order for there to be an extinction burst, there needs to have previously been consistency. And I would like to say, what reward is it? What action is going on here? It's very, very difficult to apply the concept of an extinction burst to a large group of people, because large groups of people typically aren't unitary actors. and they don't all have one behavior in common or one goal in common. And the reason I think it's dangerous to think of this as an extinction burst, again, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, though I have very clear leanings of my own, it's dangerous because basically your action or to an extinction bias is going to be to hold your own, maintain that consistency, and the behavior will become unlearned. But holding your own when more drastic measures are needed is basically, sitting on your hands and going, nope, it'll go on its way on its own if I do nothing. And I think that's really, really incredibly dangerous. I really think, and I'm kind of reaching out to, white people on this, because I think to a certain extent, this is something that people of color have always known. I think to a certain extent, indigenous people have known that white people trying to take over a country is not something that you meet with an extinction burst. It almost sounds funny when I say it. Black people have known, it's not an extinction burst. There's been different schools of thought, from the, do you yes sir them to death, or do you rise up against them? I think in general, the perspective that this could somehow be an extinction burst, and that the appropriate course of action to do nothing is a very privileged perspective to take. It's a very, perhaps white, but definitely privileged perspective to take, to think that the appropriate course of action is just to do nothing. I think that keeps you in your comfort zone, and I think that's very, very dangerous if you truly believe that there is something dangerous going on in this country right now. And it mischaracterizes the violence that's being used, because we are not talking about 3-year-olds, because they didn't get a sucker at the grocery store. We are talking about full-fledged adults with incredible amount of power and influence in this country. Who are trying to manipulate society, and there is no parallel. It's unfair to describe it as a temper tantrum that diminishes the real harm that these actions might cause, and it diminishes the real action that we need to take. These are adults in serious situations, and we cannot continue to infantilize someone. Although it certainly seems appealing when someone acts like a child to call them a child, the behavior might be childlike of it, but the effects are not. So I have the perspective of, treat situations with the gravity that it is due, and calling this as an extinction burst does not adequately describe the current political situation in the United States. Now, if you're asking what I do think the situation represents or mirrors, I will tell you that it's more like moral panic theory. And moral panic theory has like a lot of steps. I did write them down so I don't miss any, so give me a second. But it's step 1 is villainizing another group of people. And this, it could be the Jews, or it could be immigrants, and specifically illegal immigrants. It could be any group of people, really. But the important thing is that you've created another. And then the next is going to be you exaggerate and distort the truth. So you target media channels and you spread misinformation. You have to do that realistically, because people would unravel your argument if you didn't. You refer to things as an epidemic or a crisis or a war on drugs. And you position yourself as what is called the moral entrepreneur, where you are the salvation and you are the alone are the truth teller, and no one else can trust you. And that in turn builds anxiety and pressure. That in turn makes people more prone to trust you because they don't know who to trust, or because they don't know who to trust, they step into an action, which is just as good for the authority that is using moral panic. And then, of course, you implement wide-swept laws, increased police force. You implement harsher penalties. You do a lot of things that we do associate with fascism. And when a lot of people are saying, like, hey, the United States is fascist, yes, we know we are not executing 3 million people. But that does not mean that we do not have several things in common with it, because we are using some of the same tactics, and those tactics are not good, even if you have the best of intent. Even if you agree with current administration's policies, you can still do a very good thing in a very bad way. And I think there's enough people out there that don't even think that we're doing a good thing in a good way. We're doing a bad thing in a bad way. That is also an option. I think right now, I don't think there's anybody in the United States who supports the wanton use of violence, and if they do, then they should really be on the receiving end of a weapon and not carrying the weapon. I'm not by any means pro jail and pro arresting our citizens, but I'm kind of curious as to the fairness of the law and determining who gets to make that decision and who is ultimately behind bars, and making sure that that is based on societal need for safety and not societal need for power. And I will be the first to admit I don't follow a lot of politics. I don't appreciate the machinations of my government in any capacity. One reason I moved out of politics as a student. But that does not mean I don't care, and that does not mean that because I don't care for politics, that I am not also deeply involved in the principles of power that shape politics. I am very invested in restoring power and agency into the lives of individuals, which is has a large extent determined my career shift from the government work and the government. I messed up my eyes that eye. It has determined my shift from government work in the public sector into private sector, where I can help people in a way that's more closely aligned with my unconscious. So, like, I'm very aware of how this has influenced and shaped me. But, like, I think the important thing to recognize is that this is not an instance of, like, well, you think one way and I think another. Potatoes, patatas, tomatoes, whatever that expression is. Tomato, there we go. It is about, at this point, recognizing that the extent of violence that we are exhibiting is dangerous, and to then not criticize the people who are using it in self-defense. But I know that's going to be challenging, because the people who need to hear this message aren't going to receive it, because everybody thinks they're sitting at the right hand of God. Everybody thinks that theirs is the moral cause, and they are acting in self-defense. And it's very hard to reach out to those people with the love that is required to reach out to those people, especially if their beliefs represent an existential threat to yours. And it's really hard for me to explain why I can be so confident on what is right and wrong. That's not symmetrical at all. Oh well. Let's get in the shower, makeup. How do we balance our, my humility in admitting that I might be wrong, and that I need to take the time to listen to other people who have different opinions, and just take a hardline stance and go, no, enough is enough. I am not going to listen to this propaganda or consider your opinion. It's kind of like what's going on right now. Today in San Antonio, it's a very cold, maybe an icy day. It's about 40 degrees outside and rainy, so it's inclement weather very shortly. And, I can sit inside and discuss with my friends, and someone could say, no, it's beautiful out, and someone could say, no, it's icy out. And we can have that debate all day long, but at a certain point, someone has to get up outside and look and go, no, it's icy. And then not let that person saying, oh, it's beautiful, when it's not. Don't allow yourself to be gaslit. Use your eyes, use your observations. And I think a lot of people are so afraid to admit that they've had horrible vision this entire time. Then they've been listening to the wrong people. It's very difficult for them to admit they're wrong. Which explains a lot of what's going on. People voted with their emotions, instead of tempering that with compassion. And that's always a hurtful thing, because that's not good mental health, right? If you can't consider someone else's needs and you can't consider the situation, that is not mental health. That is like pure childlike egocentrism. And one of the things that we teach in mental health is eventually you have to be able to look at the situation, consider the other person, and consider yourself. You have to have a balance of perspectives to weigh your mental health, so you can know if what you're feeling is reasonable, so you can know to the extent that anyone can know, that your worldview is good and in line with your values, or if your worldview has actually secretly been betraying you, that your attitudes and your beliefs and your assumptions are causing you to behave in a way that you don't respect, that if someone else were to do, you would call them out for it. And I think there's a lot of not self-reflection going on. And so for the opposing side to that lack of reflection to sit back and say, oh, it's just an extinction burst, it's just a temper tantrum, they'll tire themselves out and it'll go away if we just stand strong. It's like, no, they will tighten the noose. They will get stronger. They will cement their hold while you wait for them to stop. So please stop using the term extinction burst. It's dangerous and lazy, and it's a perspective that you can only have, incorrectly have. It's not the correct term to use, but you can only have it taken from a position of comfort and ease. And for those people who do not have that comfort and ease, I think it's harmful. It's like the Gandhi quote: the only thing that good men in this world need, or evil in this world needs to succeed, is for good men to stand by and do nothing. And I think we're reaching at that point where there's a lot of people who are standing by and doing nothing. And there's a lot of people who are perhaps embarrassed, not enough, in my opinion, about how they've handled their previous conduct. But there's a lot of people who won't go to the polls, so to speak. And I use that from the literal people don't go to the polls. But there are people who aren't going to do the right thing. So if you are able and willing, that's where you take your action. It's not an extinction burst. It's a deliberate attempt on someone to consolidate their power, use moral panic theory to change the societal rules of the game. And you cannot no longer stand by and say, well, I'm not partisan, or I'm not going to do anything. You may realize that you actually have an obligation to act again, to speak for those who cannot and to advocate where advocacy becomes necessary. So that was just my 2 cents. Like I said, I'm not trying to hate a group of people. I do not think we need any more hate in this conversation, but I do think we need honesty, and we do need people willing to speak truth to power. And one of the ways that we can do that is by not kidding ourselves, and using incorrect terminology. It just gets to me. I know that's like a very autistic thing to like focus in on this one tangible problem and like micro focus on that when there's so many broad societal constructs going on right now. But for me, that was the one thing that I'm like, oh, I understand this. I can explain this. This is not extinction. This is not behavior contingency reward. This is absolutely something to do with political theory, and not, Pavlovian behavioral science. So I'm sorry if that bummed you, but this is what I want to talk about, and this is I need to get off my chest, and this is how I share my love with others, by standing united in the best way that we can from where we are. So thank you for watching. Have a beautiful day. Use what I used, and I will see you tomorrow.